Hi, I'm Al Adamson. I'm here today at the Northwestern School of Law, Lincoln Hall, with Dr. Michael Moon, a longtime friend and colleague, and we are here attending the Northwestern Leadership Roundtable on Talent Analytics and Economic Opportunity. Michael, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, Al, for having me.
Oh, it's fantastic.
Yes.
You've been here almost every one, sixth year.
Yeah, inaugural, 6 years ago, and I was invited in by Ian O'Keefe. At the time, he was at Sears. I was doing my dissertation there, and I've been allowed to come back ever since. I can sneak in.
So, all right. Yeah. Well, here you are. Well, thanks for being here. And ADP is sponsoring this event, and you've been at ADP for a while now, and they're doing some great work. What's your role there?
So my current role at ADP is actually as the Director for Customer Success for Data Cloud. So Data Cloud is our analytics and benchmarking solution. And my job is really to think about the entire system, about how do we help our clients not only adopt the technology itself, but be able to understand how to apply and utilize the data, the transactional data that they have access to within the application. So it's really helping them kind of go on this journey from being primarily focused on reporting and efficiency and effectiveness to also now, how do we optimize the workforce? How do we, better combine people, skills, and talent in the right place at the right time to have the right outcome, not only for the company, but also for the employee.
Yeah, and exactly the theme that we're talking about. It's not only about the organization, it's about the individual and honoring, their humanity, so they're not overworked, underappreciated, all those things. In your background, you have a doctorate in human capital management, and you have a passion around diversity and inclusion and other themes. Can you speak about that and how that integrates with the technology?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I speak to a lot of HR audiences, first off, the PhD sometimes can scare them, and I'm going to teach them about basic analytics. What I like to do is show a chart, right? I go, okay, so this is, I'm equally left and right brained, right? I talk about my background actually as a performer, but then the idea that it's very much an interdisciplinary, I think, field, right, space right now. And so having an HR background, an HR tech background, an analytics background, and being a numbers person, and then on top of that, the organizational psychology. So it's a hybrid, and I think that has helped me think about data. I always say it's how it helps allow me to humanize the workforce, right, and the data. And so my passion has always been around how people are connected to one another and how those connections actually can result in certain outcomes for individuals or keep them from not being able to achieve certain outcomes. So it's really, I talk all the time, we hear all the time actually about human capital being the last competitive advantage. But I truly believe, and have been saying for quite a while, it's actually social capital, right? So, we can think about this way, you can take a high-performing individual, a great leader in one company, put them into another setting, and they may not do as well, right? Because they're being removed from a system and put into another system. So I think that there are techniques now, they're using organizational network analysis, using even decision trees, and thinking about measuring people, not as traditional regression analysis, A causes B or leads to B plus C. It's more about how do all of these things together, right? And because the techniques are there, we're getting there, it enables us to start to think about the system, which is constantly changing and dynamic.
Absolutely. So, I love what you're saying around social capital, and it's the case where it's real. Relationships people can relate to. I get along with that person really well. We work really well together. We get stuff done. In other cases, it's suboptimal because people are stretched too thin. Underpinning that now are tools and data that can help shed light on that, yet not all organizations are doing it. Yeah. So my pointed question to you, if I'm listening and I'm an HR leader, HR business partner, someone in HRIT, we all have our set of experiences that shed light on the reality of our organization. Yet we all have our structure of interpretation. So technology is going to be the solve, or we just got to communicate differently. So if I am one of those individuals, how would you advise them to open up their mind to what's possible, that it's an and at the end of the day, that technology is an enabler, yet we still have to have an understanding of these dynamics and how to bring them together. So it's a change initiative as well as a technology intervention. And again, I probably was overly prescriptive with the answer, but at the same time, I just want to tee it up as an idea that it takes several different elements to bring about change in an organization.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. If you'd asked me that question 5 years ago, I'm like, I would have been, I don't know.
Yeah.
Right? And I think part of that is we weren't having these kinds of conversations. We might have said, well, your people are your last competitive advantage if you take care of your people, right? But everyone was like, yeah, right? I think and I don't know exactly what the catalyst was, but we are seeing a lot, it becoming more of the norm to talk about the collection of people, and I'm not a big fan of the whole employee experience like label, right? But it is truly about the total experience that an employee has. And I think when you talk about it in those human terms, as a leader, you kind of like, okay, yeah, that I fit in there too. But again, some of the analytic approaches, some of the research that's coming out from different places, we're able to actually, and it's sad sometimes that you have to be able to show the financial impact of something first to get the attention on it. But I think we've hit this kind of tipping point around diversity, right? Which is, and we can show, we know, right, that diversity leads to more creativity or creative discord, which can lead to greater levels of innovation. And so I think now that leaders are starting to see there is a true impact. It's not just about how many females you have or what's the split of different race and ethnicity you have in the organization. Yep. It's about so much more than that. And they're actually able to see how that impacts people in the organization. I think it's not as much convincing that has to happen. At the measurement side of it, it's still a little bit of the crux because it's soft, right? It's and but I think we've hit a tipping point where it's one of those, it's not a nice to do. It's kind of like with engagement in the 90s. In the beginning, it was like, it was a fad. It was, oh, look what, this vendor came out with and Gallup's doing this, right? And it's now not a thing that is just, our competitor does. It's just kind of how organizations work. Right.
So. And to carry on that point, I'd like you to go a bit deeper on it. I do not know the study offhand. At the same time, I've seen this insight shared repeatedly that is based on research, that's based on case studies in organizations where women might not have as broad a relationship base. They don't not as many contacts that they're touching over a period of time, but they have deeper relationships that are more meaningful than men.
It's the quality. It's absolutely, it's the quality. So I was just speaking with someone the other day about, I ask questions. I'm an evidence-based HR practitioner, and I like to ask questions of the audience, just kind of shake them up and go, oh, wait a minute. Maybe I don't know where the evidence for that came from, right? Because it's common sense. So I say, all right, so how many of you in here, true or false, right? Having a larger network is better for you personally and professionally, right? And everybody goes, like that's actually not true, right? It's not about how many people you're connected to. It's about the quality of those connections. It's about how frequently you may or may not interact with those connections. It's about the attributes of each of the individuals in that network, right? And so the research that you're citing is really around that women are better networkers, right? They're better at developing relationships. And I hate generalizing, but that's what this study showed, right? So networks and network analysis, it's based on, social psychology, and then the analysis of it itself is graph theory. But it's the idea that there are levels of trust, right, that exist with the network that result in norms of reciprocity. Right? So the higher level trust, the more I'm going to help you, and not necessarily help you because I want something, but because that's right. So those types of relationships, right, can help lead to different types of outcomes than say a larger network where there's not a lot of reciprocity.
Right. So I want to pick up on a couple of things that you said right there. So you're talking about something that's very understandable. It's very credible. And many would then think, well, why don't we just do that? Why doesn't that just happen? There has to be some accountability created, or visibility first and foremost, and that means measurement. Historically, it might be the case, well, how do we measure relationship, quality, size, and all that. As you and I know, that can be done, and it's not too difficult. And that's different than 10, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So now we have HR leaders, operational leaders, even leaders in IT saying, okay, this is something that might be a good idea. However, there are some ethical implications that we have to consider. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, so I'll step back really in terms of one of the limitations, besides not having technology that was easy to understand, what is traditionally network analysis in organizations has been done through active surveys, right? So coming up with a set of questions, sitting down with someone saying, okay, who do you interact with on a regular basis? Who do you go to, on a regular basis for advice, for support, for help on a project, right? And there are elements of either you might be given a list and say, oh, pick from that list, or you have to remember from that list. So that's an active study, right? There's a lot more ethics that concerns, right? Okay, well, if I tell you this, what is that going to mean? Are you going to share that information with someone? What happens when you analyze that and they find out I'm over here? Like, does that mean I'm getting fired, right? Yep. So there's a right way and a wrong way to do that type of study, but I think that has been one of the limitations. It's also, the questions have to be framed in the research itself. You can't just ask any random questions because it's graph theory. If I have a connection, it's a 1. If I don't, it's a 0. And so, there we've got the active side. The passive side, right, is where, again, there's ethics behind it. And I think there still is, but definitely we've moved the needle a little bit more on the passive, where we're mining email, we're mining chat, we're mining IVR, we're voicemails, right? So passive ways of looking at who's interacting with whom, how frequently, how many, not only internally, but externally. And so I think there's still that concern, right, about the privacy of that. And I think a lot of the vendors in this space have done a really good job of, they have people on staff, they have legal, they've been able to pass certain, get GDPR certification or whatever we refer to it as, right? So we're seeing more of a movement, right? And it makes it more accessible because there's less work that an employer has to do. It's less concern about asking the wrong question. There is still value in both. But when you're trying to understand, because with active surveys, you have to get to a certain threshold. You really need about 75 to 80% of that network to actually respond, and you're not going to be able to reflect the true network. Whereas with a passive network, you have all the nodes, right? The nodes is the individuals, so it makes it a much more robust way to kind of visualize what's happening inside of an organization. It's as Rob Koss, it's how work gets done. It's the hidden way in which work gets done inside of an organization.
And it's real.
It's real.
It's not making it up. You're not going to manipulate it.
Right.
If you're going to manipulate it, you're going to do it all the time, and that's going to be detrimental to you as an individual as well as to the organization. So what we're talking about now, it has a lot of different stakeholder groups. It has operations, IT, HR, the individuals themselves, managers, team leads. And what has been lacking, I would contend, is some discipline, some governance that makes sure that everyone's on the same page. They understand what's being done, why it's being done, what problem is what great looks like if this goes well, what are some of the risks, so they can make a conscious decision. I agree with you, the vendor community who are in this work are doing a really good job identifying the risk areas. But can you speak to this notion of governance as we're entering this new realm of work in particular, where we have globalization, disruptors like AI and robotic automation and all this. So we need to, and I would contend, to get these formerly disparate groups together. What are you seeing? Because you have this diverse background that appreciates these various dimensions.
So I'm going to step back on the privacy side and the concerns about the ethics of it. So when you are doing any sort of, in the academic space, when you're doing any sort of research with humans, right? There's a whole board that you go up in front of, an institutional review board. And you have to be able to demonstrate, why are you doing this? What's the value add? How are you going to protect people? What are your remediations? So I think if organizations approach that way, maybe not in a so formal way, right? And anytime they're wanting to use their people data, right? That's important. I think when you're trying to get these different areas inside of an organization to kind of get on the same page about it, ultimately, it's not just about the network. It's not the pretty graphs and the visualization. It's now, how do we take there are measures, right, of a network, whether it's connectivity, homophily, heterophily. You can look at the eigenvector values, which is the number of steps it takes from me to get to you, right, which is the 6 degrees of separation for Kevin Bacon, which is now, I think, is like 4.6 degrees.
Absolutely.
But you can take those numbers and then you can correlate that with other things that matter to those stakeholders. So being able to look at, the density of a network and correlate that with customer satisfaction, right? So now you're starting to take, it's like any people analytics or any people data, right? It's great. It can tell you so much, right? But you still have your people in the different, business areas like, that doesn't matter to me, or I don't understand how it affects my business. When you can then connect some of these soft things like the relationships to actual, tangible outcomes, that's how you can start to get people to sort of be on the same place about it. So.
Yeah, and something that you said, I just want to highlight for those who are listening, when you go to an review board and you're saying, I'm going to do a project, and there's the implication that there's a start and stop. I'm going to do a study, I'm going to have some results and recommendations, all that, and then you might go to the project again. Now we're in this place where not only are we doing that on an event-driven basis, on a project basis, we're now implementing tools that are sustainable, they're ongoing. So we have analytics on demand, so to speak. Not only does it have an executive audience where these presentations, these results were published, if you will. Now it's being democratized through an organization to HR business partners, to operational leaders, finance, and others. So can you speak to that notion that we're effectively, call it AI? I don't know if that's going to be artificial intelligence or augmented intelligence or what have you.
I prefer that term, but
but this notion of sustainable tools and on-demand, analytics to shed light on these and other, bring this disparate data together so we can answer these questions in real time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you just hit the nail on the head, right? It's not about grabbing the data once a year, right? Because then I'm going to use engagement as an example, right? You do your engagement surveys, you have your third-party vendor, most likely, if you're doing it ethically, you're not doing it in-house, and you get the data, they analyze it, they clean it, they normalize it, they put together their reports, then they send them back to the organization. The organization decides, okay, now what are we going to do with it? Then these are the areas we need to focus on. They sit down, they have their focus groups, maybe, right? Yeah. And then they go, okay, here are the actions we're going to take. All right, great. We got to do this globally, right? We're going to okay, now, oh, wow, it's time for our next survey. Oh, wait a minute, we have 150% turnover. Yeah. How can we possibly benchmark, right, now, right? So I think it's that notion of it is a network that is constantly changing, and it's human people, right? There are people in this network. So why would we use, static measures of what's happening? So being able to understand what's happening in real time so we can be more proactive. And now I'm not even I'm not talking about predictive, just looking at the data right now, like, oh, I can see that we're starting to go down. Let me make some corrections, or let me go find out what might be happening. But I do love the term, and I use it a lot too, the democratization of the data. It's not only about getting the data in the hands of the people that need it, but and so that they can use it. But it's also really important for them to they own their own data and the accuracy of that data, right? Yeah. So I love analytics for many reasons, but sometimes when you're trying to convince individuals of the value, I said, look, at a minimum, it's going to help you see where you have holes in your data, right? Yeah. Look, no wonder, because you're missing termination date for all those, employees from that acquisition. So, yeah.
Well, let me pick up on that point, because many organizations have not defined what people analytics is, or talent analytics, whatever you want to call it. And many thus get caught in creating dashboards and pushing out reports and, automating processes, which has a role. But if they're not doing more advanced analytics, whether it be on an event-driven basis or leveraging a tool that automates it, they don't have the story around those metrics that they're publishing, because now it goes to the internal customer and they're saying, well, what's the story? What does it mean? Is high 20% turnover, is that good, bad? Is there a cost to it? So can you talk about the role of more advanced analytical techniques relative to dashboarding and reports?
So I'm gonna challenge a little bit in the sense that I don't think we need advanced analytics to get to the place where we feel comfortable being able to interpret what this means, right?
Agreed.
I think that the advanced analytics is going to help get us more to, okay, this is the value. What are the techniques we use to determine the impact the incremental impact that it might have? Being able to use analytics, let's say, we can do with O&A too, but let's just say in general, right? I've got 200 salespeople in auto shops that I need to be able to train, right? How do I determine how many people I really need to train, right? Those are where there's advanced, and it's really about how do you optimize the people and use data to optimize the people that you couldn't really do without a computer, right? You need that advanced computing. But I think too that just in general, right? It's not about the data, just like it's not about the technology, it's not about the data. It's about being able to derive the insight from the data, tell the story, the narrative behind it, and then also being able to take it to the next step, which is what are we going to do about it? Making those recommendations, what actions are we going to take? But then remembering too, okay, we've done this process, here's the analysis that we have. We need to keep doing that, right? And also knowing that, okay, just because we've always done it this way, maybe we're starting to see some shifts in, let's try this way. And again, being able to be agile in how we use analytics, as well as being an agile organization.
Guys, absolutely, because a lot of the analytics that we're doing is based on the frequency approach, and that is the way most analytics is done, which is not a bad thing. We just have to be clear that it's looking at the past and with the underlying assumption that it's going to be an accurate predictor of the future. And we're getting new data or new dynamics unfold, disruptions and things like that. So my pointed question again to you, if I am an HR business partner, HR leader, and I've been hearing about people analytics for the last 10, 15 plus 20 years, and it's been an intimidating, esoteric thing for many people. Why don't you think it's being adopted more broadly, or do you think it is being adopted more broadly?
No, I think you're right. I don't think it's being adopted more broadly. We hear about all these great organizations that are doing these amazing things, and they're using all these tools and techniques, and they've got a team of 150 data scientists, and they just solved world peace, right? But the reality is that is such a small percentage of, most organizations are smaller, right? Middle-sized, smaller. There are less resources. There are people, even when you had 3 or 4, maybe HR people to 1,000, they are wearing many, many, many hats, and they have to worry about the things that directly impact employees, like making sure they get paid, right? Making sure that the organization complies with, OSHA and all of these other things that kind of regulatory that is part of the HR space, right? So I think that's part of it. There's, and again, I'm going to speak from the HR lens, right? There's still a lack of comfort with numbers. And, we've been talking for a while, and SHRM, put out some statements around this as well, that we're missing in the HR education programs. We're missing analytics. We're missing business. We're missing finance. When I got my master's in HR, I wanted to learn about the topics. I wanted to understand compensation, how benefits was, but I didn't want to be that kind of an HR practitioner. I knew I wanted to do something different, right? And so I took all my electives in the business school. But why wouldn't we do that, right? So I think that it's time for organizations to say, you know what, we have to own that. We've got to upskill. We can't expect that we're going to automatically, we decided we want HR to be strategic business partners and poof, right? It's the same way. Like here's analytics, right? And all of a sudden I know what to do with this data. Yeah. So I think it's a lack of comfort. It's also sometimes this fear, right, of an individual with any, even with technology, not adopting technology, right? So that's actually what I studied in my dissertation was technology adoption in the workplace. I looked at social technology, but the constructs behind it, there is a level of fear. There's a level of I'm not quite sure what that's going to do for me. So I think with the data, let's say I'm the person that does all the reporting in my company. I do this, right? I may not want to have this other system, right? Because it might replace me, right? Or I may not be seen as valuable. Right. So there's a lot of different, there's lack of awareness, like what can analytics do for me? How is it different than reporting, right? I think most people are doing reporting pretty well. There's still that debate, like, what's headcount? No, that's the finance version of headcount, right? I think sometimes also it's just getting out of our own way.
I can't agree more. Yeah. And one of the things that I'm also seeing that touches all the elements that you just shared is that we're under-resourced to do analytics. And so we'll get a technology which might help, but it won't be, quote unquote, the answer. And there's this kind of prevailing thinking that, okay, we're implementing a core HR system and we're going to the cloud, therefore we're going to have analytics all of a sudden after spending all this money. And that, as you know, as very well intimately, that doesn't happen. There needs to be investment. So how can organizations get a better understanding of their business priorities and build and budget capability appropriately, and make sure they have ample people, ample technology spend, ample processes to make it come to life. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think it depends on, are you asking leadership? How do you get leadershiп to do it? Or how do you get HR to get leadership to buy into it?
A little both, more the former initially.
Okay. Sometimes it just simply takes a new CHRO coming in.
Yeah.
Right.
I've echoed that.
Sometimes
this is a decision.
It's changed, right?
We're not looking for a bunch of business cases. This is. I mean, who came in with the business case for marketing? They said, this is what we're doing. This is what, and it's similar, I think, with how we look at our people.
Yeah, I think that So I steal ideas from people that speak at conferences. And I think this is brilliant, and I can't give the woman credit, but she was in HR, and they didn't have any tools, but she was being asked questions that she couldn't answer, right? So she took it upon herself to figure out, how do I do this in Excel, right? Took her a lot of time, right? But she was able to present to leadership, and sometimes it takes, it's something you want leadership to buy in, but if they don't, that doesn't mean necessarily you stop, right? So she solved a problem, right? And she presented leadership. They're like, wow, this is awesome. Hey, can you do this for this other group? Yeah, sure. Right. Oh, great. What about, I'd like to, but this takes me like 40 hours a month to do. But if, we could get a little bit of budget, right? Maybe get someone in here, just baby steps sometimes. I can get this for you, and we might be able to automate this so that you can get access to it on a weekly basis, right? So sometimes that's what it takes. And there's no one right answer for how to do this.
Well, just to pick up on that before we get too far afield, I cannot emphasize that enough, at least from my perspective, because when someone goes off and burns the midnight oil repeatedly, and they've done a great job, and they say, oh, now we want more of it, what have they done? They've done a great job, but they've also created the illusion of capacity in the organization.
Yes.
And if they're not building towards something that's sustainable, and what if they, leave? Then the relationship with the data sets and all that knowledge leaves. At the same time, I'm not sure historically there's been an openness by CHROs and others like them to say, oh, wow, how can, if that's really valuable to me, I'm now going to have to make an investment in staying in curiosity as, what is that going to require? And, and be part of the ROI crafting as opposed to, sitting back and waiting
Yeah.
for the dissertation to come and say,
Yeah.
what are your
This
thoughts
is
on that?
actually why I left work as a practitioner. I left 2013. I was
Yeah.
at Thomson Reuters. Nobody thought I was important. I mean, in 6 years, it's like, well, of course it's important. I mean, everybody's got people analytics. They just didn't think it was important, or that, I'd say it's not that, I mean, they were doing metrics and they were doing some great stuff at the board level. But as I found, even in the organization right before that, it just wasn't a priority.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers that question.
It absolutely does. And it's a bit, when I speak at certain conferences, I'll ask, particularly if they're CEOs, COOs, CFOs, who here regards their people as the most important asset? Most everybody raises their hand. And I say, well, that's fantastic. Who among you has a people strategy or talent strategy?
Right.
And then, most of the hands will go down, but a few will stay up. And I said, well, those who have their hands still up, who would like to share how you systematically formulate, measure, and manage that strategy over time? Not one hand is data.
Yeah.
So it's like, we're not putting our money where our mouth is, our energy where, our mouth is. And I see that changing. However, we don't like it to change faster. My pointed question thus to you, what is going to be the shift in your opinion? You mentioned this CHRO, coming in. Is there anything else that you've seen or that you would advocate be done to elevate the adoption of talent analytics?
Well, I mean, I think back from an individual level, right? I already talked about building the financial and business acumen, the basic analytical skills, but also teaching individuals. To your point, right? It's not about, here's a bunch of data, what does it say? But building a logical framework or a logical approach to how we're going to use this data, right? And starting with, what is that business question? What is that strategy? What is it that we're trying to answer, right? Or, here's our business strategy. What is it going to take from people in order for us to execute on that, right? And then breaking that down into further, right? And once we are able to do that, teach people to do that, and they're able to feel comfortable doing that, it's about also remembering when we're starting that, how are we going to measure that we're successful? How do we know this has actually made a difference? So what we typically have a tendency to do is, let's just do this whole project, and then somebody says, it's been 6 months. What's the ROI on that?
Yeah, right.
And then you're scrambling, trying to figure out, how do I get that data? And well, is it really ROI? And so embedding that type of thinking into everything that we do in an organization, whether you're in HR, you're in finance, marketing, you're the secretary of the company, the executive secretary, it doesn't matter. It's how do we create a culture, right, around the value of data and how to approach that logically.
Yeah. And if I heard you correctly, think about that at the outset.
Yes.
So you're not trying to do it post-hoc. I wish I was involved in this conversation, earlier. And that really gets to this notion that data and reporting and analytics, at least from my perspective, I'd be interested in yours as well, has been thought of after the fact. In other words, okay, we're going to select this system, we're going to improve this process, we're going to create this employee experience, and then we're going to figure out how we're going to measure it.
Right.
What about?
Well, I even argue too that before that we're missing a step. Right?
What's that?
We're about to implement our system, right? If we're not a brand new organization, right? What about our data that we're bringing over? There's not enough attention on the quality of that data, the processes around how that data gets generated, how do we keep it, auditing it, how do we keep it accurate? And you've got one organization, you're going to go to a new vendor, like, oh, well, they don't really do okay, we'll put it in an Access database. If we need it, we'll go back to it. Then they switch to another vendor. Now all their data is a mess. And then that's another obstacle. They just give up, right? The data is not good, so I'm not going to be able to analyze it. So I think that we have to start, how do we, start the whole process with making sure, what data do we need? What data do we already have? Is it good? What are we going to do to clean it? And what are we going to do to keep it that way? Then you can throw the technology on that and the processes on that. But at the core, we have to understand the data that we have, the data that we're going to want to be able to capture, and where we're going to store that.
Yeah.
So.
And so we've been talking, obviously, a lot about people analytics, talent analytics. At this event here at Northwestern School of Law, we talk quite a bit about social responsibility, ethics, and what it means for the individuals. Because after all, they're generating the data. What's in it, for them.
Yeah.
So can you speak to the social responsibility that you see not only people analytics professionals need to have, but broader HR and in fact organizations and leadership in particular?
Yeah, so and we go way back to the beginning when we talked about why we're seeing this movement in D&I, right? There is a very close connection between that and social responsibility, sustainability, treating your employees with respect, treating your customers with respect, and the benefit that will have to your organizations, your people, to the community around you, to your stakeholders. I think that data can actually help us do that much more effectively.
Yeah. So as we start to wrap up, what are some tidbits of advice that you would give, particularly let's start HR leaders or those aspiring HR leaders, leaders of tomorrow. What are some of the tidbits that you'd say, okay, if you were going to go at analytics, what is a starting point?
Yeah. First off, why are you going to go? Know why, right? You don't need to hire a team of data scientists to get started. You don't need PhDs. You don't need me. You don't need. It's like I'm like myself out of a job all the time. But to get started, it's just what is a business problem that you're trying to solve. But also, let's say you're trying to maybe build a team, right? Build it with people from different backgrounds, and I don't mean different educations. Maybe you have a data analyst, right? Maybe you have a data scientist, maybe, right? But get someone from finance, maybe an engineer, someone from marketing, because again, that's diversity of thought and experience, which can help you really think about the way that you might be doing analytics, completely different lens, right? And then you've got that business perspective as you're starting to build that capability. So I think it's, building a team of people from different backgrounds. It's not trying to solve every problem in the organization. And sometimes it's just about picking one, one focus area, right? We have a turnover problem. Let's start just with that. And also remembering that, even though I talked about the importance of data and data quality, the data doesn't have to be perfect.
That's right.
And that is actually where advanced analytics actually is making a huge difference, because it can help fill in the gaps with missing data. It can help with normalizing the data. It can help create better understanding of the data, even if it's not perfect.
Hug you for saying that. It's absolutely true. So, Michael, super pleasure.
Thank you
Thanks for
so much,
sharing.
Alan. Thank you.
See you soon.
Yeah.